Harvey's Hot Takes with Bryan Hayes. Bryan, the Four Nations face-off rosters will be announced on Wednesday. I'm excited about this, and I remember when our friends Mike Johnson and Craig Button put together their projected roster, they had Connor Bedard as the 13th forward. And it seemed like a great idea at the time. This was before the season started. You know, a perfect place for him, get him some experience in the international men's game, that whole thing. Well, Connor Bedard, as you know, Bryan, has not had the best season. So after watching him this season, what do you think? Should he make this Four Nations face-off roster or no?
No, and I don't think it's particularly close, Jay. I don't think he's even close to being at a position right now where he'd be comfortable with best on best, or John Cooper and his staff would even think about putting him into the lineup. So this is not a house league game. This isn't a scenario where everyone gets on the ice. Connor Bedard is going to have his time with the national team. I believe that. And I think when you mentioned Mike Johnson, Craig Button, I could reason with what they were saying before the season. Ty going to Connor Bedard. And I would still stand by that today if he was in a position where he was maybe tied with a Travis Konechny or a Mark Scheifele or a Brandon Hagel, guys who I think are on the bubble that could make it, maybe won't. But Bedard hasn't played himself into that conversation. If anything, he's played himself off that conversation or away from that conversation. And I don't completely blame him. I think we've lost a little bit of perspective here, Jay, because of how much hype came with him through his junior career in the WHL, what he did at the World Juniors, even what he did when he was healthy last year, winning the Rookie of the Year. That came with a pretty significant injury. He's only 19 years old. He's the second youngest player in the league. He's dealing with a sophomore slump, but he also happens to be on the worst team in the league. The Chicago Blackhawks have to own some of this too. They have done nothing to help this kid. They are the worst team in the league, and I have no idea how they're going to get out from underneath this, but it's going to have to start with Connor Bedard. And again, when we consider what happened with McDavid, with all the hype and how he showed up and did what he did, I think people thought maybe Bedard could follow suit. What Sidney Crosby did, what Eric Lindros did back in the early 90s when he finally got there with Philly, this was the type of hype Bedard was getting. The next one, a generational talent. Well, not everyone follows the same path. And I would suggest he's probably going to follow a path similar to that of Nathan MacKinnon, right? Doesn't play exactly the same. MacKinnon can fly. Bedard doesn't skate at the same level. But if you look at MacKinnon, lots of hype, first overall pick, really good rookie season, and then he struggled for a few years. And that's because Colorado struggled, and he couldn't find his footing. Eventually, he got there. I think the same thing will happen with Bedard. I think he's banking on his team, the Blackhawks, to help him get there, just like Colorado had to with MacKinnon. But that's okay. I'm not sure Bedard will be ready by 2026. Forget the Four Nations face-off. I'm not sure he's on the Olympic team next year. If I had to guess right now, I don't think he will be. But by 2030, he will be. By 2034, he'll be the man. Do not lose sight of how good this guy is, what he's capable of doing. It's been a bit of a tough start. The game in Toronto on Monday night, he was basically invisible. He brought nothing to the table. That's fine. Not everyone's McDavid, not everyone's Crosby, not everyone's Lindros, Gretzky, etc. He's taking a different path. He's not quite ready to pop at the NHL level and certainly not at the international level.
Bryan, I want to switch to baseball, and I want to show you a quote from MLB insider Andy Martino of SNY New York. He says this: "It's no secret that the Yankees and Mets are all in on Juan Soto." As one league source reiterates that there's a widespread belief among bidders that Toronto will come in with the highest offer. Now, you and I talked last week about how you were not going to get sucked in to this whole free agent frenzy over Juan Soto, the way we were all sucked in about the free agent frenzy over Shohei Ohtani. But that's a legitimate baseball insider there, Bryan. So a week after we talked last, what do you think of that report?
Yeah, this one's going to suck me in to the whole Juan Soto conversation, Jay, because if it was a scenario where Soto just said, hey, thank you for the presentation, but please leave, then that would be a different story. Then it would be basically a waste of time. Then it's something where we look back on it and it was a foregone conclusion the Blue Jays simply were not going to sign Juan Soto. But if Andy Martino is accurate here, and I have no reason to believe that he's not, or at least that's what he's legitimately hearing through baseball, that means the Jays are actually willing to do what Scott Boras wants them to do. Boras is the super agent. He represents Juan Soto. His stance has always been, show me the money. Whoever's willing to pay me the most and my client the most, that's where my client's going to go. So this would lead you to believe if the Jays actually are going to offer the most money, Soto should jump at it considering the way, again, Boris reacts to most offers of this stature and the way Soto reacted to his free agency right after losing the World Series. We both remember that. Immediately, he went into business mode. But I'm still not convinced it's going to happen. I'm still very skeptical that he would actually entertain the Blue Jays. And I think if this turns out to be true, Jay, that they actually did offer him the most money and he still went to the Yankees for less, or the Mets for less, or the Red Sox for less, that's an embarrassing moment for the Blue Jays. That's going to be akin to when Kawhi left after he won a title. Different context, but it was like, why not us? Kawhi Leonard wins a championship and he says, nah, I'm going to L.A. Juan Soto could be offered the most money by the Blue Jays. Nah, I'm going to New York if that ends up happening. I think that'll be an embarrassing scenario for them to explain. And I'm talking about Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins here, that they literally offered the most that they could possibly offer, more than anybody else if this is true. And if he still turns them down, I think it's an existential moment for the Blue Jays. I think it proves how desperate they were to get him. That's why they'd be willing to pay him that much. But it also proves that they're in the position to be that desperate. And maybe they need to take a page out of their own book. And I'm talking again about Shapiro and Atkins here. When Mark Shapiro got here, he said, we need to build a great farm system. They don't have that. It's not a reality, to the point where they have to overpay to maybe get Juan Soto. Go back to the well if you're Shapiro and Atkins or whoever the next executives are going to be. The big dogs in baseball, they're not coming up here. You can get the Gosmans. You can overpay for the Springers. You can get guys like that in the middle range by splashing cash. But you need to draft. You need to develop. You need to sign shrewd free agents when they're available. You need to win on trades. That's what they have to get back to if you're the Blue Jays. And if Soto actually scoffs at the most money, it's almost a sign, I think, to Rodgers and the ownership. Get back to basics here and stop looking desperate in the offseason.
I love it. All right, let's lighten things up for our final hot take, Brian. First of all, Aaron Rodgers turned 41 years old on Monday. And also on Monday, his head coach, Jeff Ulbrich, said he will continue to play Rodgers despite his struggles. Take a listen.
This was the week. I mean, I know Aaron was looking forward to it. He was off the injury report. He was healthy. You said he was the healthiest he's been in quite some time. And his, statistically didn't do well at all. Had some trouble with his accuracy. The pick six. Would you ever consider making a change at that position now?
Not as of today.
So Rodgers will continue to play. And, what are they going to do? Who are they honestly going to put in instead of Aaron Rodgers? But do you believe, Bryan Hayes, that this season has been so taxing, the entire experience with the Jets has been so taxing on Rodgers that we might actually be seeing the final games of his career?
Yeah, I think it's very possible. And honestly, I kind of hope that that's the case, Jay. I find it very depressing to watch a legend of any sport just kind of drag on with their career, especially in a losing situation, especially in an embarrassing situation. And part of it is Rodgers that has to take the blame because he wanted out of Green Bay. He pushed their buttons to the point where they finally said, fine, we'll move you. Where do you want to go? And he chose the Jets. He chose the Jets. And I blame the Jets in large part for this as well, because it was always a house of cards that was going to collapse. You and I talked about this in August, in early September. I never believed in this program, even with a healthy Aaron Rodgers, because simply no one can. They will poison you. They will drag you down. That's the reality of the New York Jets, and that's what's happened here with Rodgers. You have an organization run by an owner there in Woody Johnson that cannot get out of his own way. They now don't have a GM. They have an interim coach who's not going to be there long term, and now they have a 41-year-old quarterback who can't really play to the same level he wanted to, yet he thinks he can. I mean, it's a cocktail that is absolutely poisonous, and it's going to run its course here the rest of the way. And if it's simply retirement or play for the New York Jets, I'd rather Rodgers gets out because it's going to get worse. It'll get uglier, and he's an all-time great. And I don't want to forget that. I don't want to forget that as a Packer fan. He was a great, great Packer. His number will be retired at Lambeau. He will return, and he will get a massive ovation when he does. He's a first-ballot Hall of Famer. He's arguably one of the 10 greatest quarterbacks to ever play. Don't allow the legacy to continue to take a hit. And if he keeps playing with the Jets throughout the rest of this year, certainly into next year, I fully expect that that'll be the case. So I'm always uncomfortable telling anyone when to retire, but in this particular case, I'll make an exception. Aaron Rodgers, New York Jets, I don't want to see it anymore. Please allow this to come to an end.
Ladies and gentlemen, did you know Aaron Rodgers was born in 1982 and Bryan Hayes was born in 1983? But unlike Aaron Rodgers, Bryan just keeps getting better with age. Always delivering the hot takes. Thanks, buddy.
Hot Takes is presented by Harvey's. Customize your burger and get it delivered from our app to your door. Harvey's, it's a beautiful thing.